Well, hey, good morning. Welcome to Writing Science Fiction is Hard. I'm James, and this is a show about writing, being creative, and doing all the hard stuff. Still working on the tagline, so we'll keep trying those out. Today, I wanted to do a quick book review of Holy Fire by Bruce Sterling, and I'm going to throw up the '90s cover, which when I went looking for art for this book, and I listened to it on Audible. So that's already kind of a different experience than, just finding the book in a bookstore and reading it. And I feel like I had a paperback of this one at one point, but I don't know what happened to it. So it's currently available on Kindle Unlimited if you have Kindle Unlimited, which makes it free to read, with a subscription. It's not technically free, but it's also in Audible as part of that. And the performance was fine. This book was published in 1996, and I have not read as much Sterling as I wish I had. So I'm working on that. My main introduction to Bruce Sterling was The Difference Engine with William Gibson. And I read The Difference Engine because I love William Gibson and I've read everything that he's written. And as I kind of worked my way through the other sort of founders of cyberpunk, it's pretty hard not to land on Bruce Sterling. He's got a lot of work out there and a number of short stories, so I plan to take a look at those as well. And then he had a series of novels in the 90s to early 2000s that pretty much everybody says are seminal to cyberpunk. So I need to check those out, and I'll be working on that. So Holy Fire is a masterclass in world building. It is imagining. Well, actually, let me switch to the new the new cover. This is what you'll see if you go looking for the book. Pretty generic, but a little smoother on the eyes. So, however, you feel about that. So let's go back. Holy Fire is a world class exercise in world building, and the question that Sterling is engaging with is, what would really happen to society when we have life extension? And he doesn't just jump to, oh, now all of a sudden people live forever. Like Peter Hamilton in the latest series he's doing as the Archimedes engine. That one is like far future and imagines different versions of humanity. And the bad guys are actually like the version of humans that have figured out how to live forever. And of course, there are trade-offs with that make them kind of evil. But of course, they don't see it that way. Whereas Holy Fire takes place in the 2070s, and the concept is basically that during the 2030s, which let's hope this doesn't happen, there's a period of plagues and mass die-offs in the human race. Things are pretty bad. And then medical science advances, kind of continues making the advances it's making now, so that people are living into their hundreds. Well, not really into their hundreds. They're living to 100 pretty reliably. And then they are just coming into the time period when like major sort of renewal can take place. And it's still a very difficult surgery, even more so than surgery. Like the person is basically like rebuilt from the cellular level. And our main character, the book opens with her, an old boyfriend has called to ask her to come visit. And it turns out that he's dying. And this is a world where you pretty much choose to die because people can't extend their lives. And while Sterling doesn't get too much into the effects of memory when you've lived for 100 years, like that's one of the things Hamilton spends a lot of time on, is people can segment their memories. And I guess he gets into this in the Commonwealth series as well. Like you reach a point where you need to decide which memories you want to keep, and then other memories you can offload and save. And then if you want to go back to them later, you can. Well, Sterling doesn't touch on that as much, but it's very much about the physical aspects of being of life extension, and then the cultural aspects. And I just think this book did the world building so well. I hesitate to say the things that weren't working for me, but the biggest one is this book kind of commits the sin of being mean to an animal. And I don't want to turn you off from the book when I say that, because the animal gets its revenge. But in the very opening chapter of the book, the main character, Maya, she goes to visit this old boyfriend. He wants to bequeath her something. And that is all just super cool entry into the world. And it did the first couple of pages, I was kind of like not sure what was going on. And then once it started sort of settling in, especially when the dog is introduced, because there is a, like, for better words, cybernetic dog that has a raised consciousness, but can sort of turn off the human aspect of itself and just become a dog again. And it's hard for the dog to do that. Like, it causes it, it's a struggle to think. And the boyfriend was actually like a researcher in life extension. Well, no, he wasn't a researcher. He did life extension throughout his life, but a lot of things, well, he was a researcher. I'm sorry. A lot of the things that he tried, he did on the dog first. So the dog was basically like his guinea pig throughout his life as he extended his life. But long story short, he asks her to take care of the dog because in his dying, the one thing he's afraid of, like, he's ready to die, but he's really afraid of what's going to happen to his dog. And he wants someone to take care of his dog. And the more I think about it, like he does mention that he could have sold the dog, but it's like giving up any sort of pet. Like, if you're thoughtful about it and it is possible to find people that will take care of your pet, especially if if you're dying or the pet is very special like that. But instead he asks her, a person who is very specifically like child and pet free at this point in their life. And so she refuses to take care of the dog. And so from the first chapter, you're just kind of like, I don't like this person. And so from that point on, like, the rest of the plot is kind of driven by randomness. And I think that was my biggest challenge with it is he gives her what is called a memory palace in this universe, which, in Aeon 14, we would call this an expanse, like basically a virtual world that, you can enter. And this one has like financial ramifications and it's connected to servers across the world. So that's all super cool. But she goes to, in this case, like in 1996, like you need to go to, like a net cafe sort of thing, like a virtual reality cafe, in order to access something like that. And she wants to do it without it being tracked, because that is another big aspect of this world in 2070, is that the government is called the polity and everything is tracked. And so that comes into play a lot later. So she accesses it. She figures out what it is. She's not super interested in it. And so again, as a character, I'm not like, okay, you got this super cool thing, but you're not super excited by it. And then she's on the bus riding home when she randomly overhears, or no, I'm sorry. This was in the virtual cafe. She overhears some younger people in their 20s talking about basically just things, their lives and decisions they're trying to make. And the girlfriend wants to go to Europe and the boyfriend doesn't. And she starts following them. And so she follows them on the bus. She interjects in their conversation, ends up kind of pulling the girl into a conversation. And then there's a lot of tension as she spends time with the girl and actually lets the girl come back to her apartment and spend time with her. And so there's a lot of contrast between how things are in the apartment, where she has a housekeeper who basically scrubs the place of bacteria and viruses, which is kind of a holdover from the plagues. And she's interacting with a person who's like, has been living in a tree. And you start to get a sense of what it's like for somebody to be 20 in this world, interacting with people in their 90s who have had, 70 years of gathering capital, getting their lives together, basically closing the door on anybody who's younger than them. And, ding, 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 that has a lot of correlation to our world now, where, a lot of our government seems directed at moving wealth to older people and not creating opportunity for younger people. And so we're already seeing this play out. And this book is only 30 years old. So this tension takes place, and then there's a question of whether Maya is going to help Britt, the girl, or not. She sort of helps her, and then that's the end of the chapter. Like, Britt is really asking her for what she's calling real money. And this is an interesting kind of parallel as well, because it sort of predates the idea of crypto, I think, in a way, because the girl is very concerned with like something of real value. Like, you could give me something of real value that could really help me, and it wouldn't cost you a lot. And of course, Maya starts making excuses that I can't give you something of real value because it's locked up in long-term investments, and I can't just remove it to give it to someone, and blah, blah, blah. There's all sort of bureaucracy to protect a thing of real value so that I can't give it to someone that it could help, even though it might not really be difficult or hurt me to do that. And so you really don't have a lot of sympathy for Maya. Like, she's just not doing things that she's doing things that seem kind of stupid, because I kept expecting Britt to like just beat the crap out of her and take something from her. Because Britt is the character who really has something to lose, right? And also needs to make a big decision about whether she wants to go to Europe or not. And it turns out she's an artist, and she makes clothing. And so from a writer's perspective, as you're looking at when you're introducing your audience to a character, and the book is Save the Cat. I can't remember the name of the author right now. I will look that up so that we can find it. Because Save the Cat, its kind of central conceit is that, let's see, books. Jamie Nash. And one of the central conceits of this book, it's been a while since I read it, I may update my knowledge on it, is that give the audience something to care about with the character early on. And even if you have a bad character who cares about something, in this case, a cat or a dog or helping someone, they could be Dr. Evil, but Dr. Evil has a hairless cat that he loves and he pets, right? So you have more sympathy for Dr. Evil. And even when Seth Green, like the kid, is introduced with Dr. Evil, like you have more sympathy for Dr. Evil because he has a child. So this guy can't be all evil, right? Like somebody had sex with him at some point. Or knowing Dr. Evil, like Seth Green was probably grown in a lab with the sharks with lasers on their heads. That's from Austin Powers. If you haven't watched Austin Powers, like I highly recommend you go watch Austin Powers. So in this first like parts of the book, like we're just not getting a lot of reasons to like Maya. And then she ends up changing her mind about a lot of things. Like it turns out that she's a bureaucrat. She, a point is being made if she votes very religiously, and she is in the medical, something like medical insurance field or medical research. And so she has a very staid life. Like she likes to go on long walks, and the only real danger she faces is tracking bacteria back into the house. So that's Maya. And I'm actually more interested in Britt and the dog as we move through this opening part of the book. Well, she makes the decision to do a life extension procedure. And she chooses and this is where I think the book really shines, because Sterling has obviously thought about everything. And I really wonder how he conceived this. Like, is he thinking up these ideas as he comes to them and wants to give this information in the book? Or did he sit down and just think of all this to begin with? Like, what does this mean to people? How do they make these decisions? Like, are there sketchy life extension procedures that then are at odds with, FDA approved in this sort of sense procedures? And are you taking on extra liability? Like, are you going to lose your health insurance if you do one of these sketchy procedures? And some people might find actually at the end of their lives that because they chose the blood boys in our day that are switching out blood with younger people, that actually has a detrimental effect. And so you're not going to live as long because you did that. And so life is always a matter of balancing these trade-offs, right? Like, do I choose a sketchy procedure or do I wait? If I wait, I'm going to die. And so these cultural impacts are kind of rippling throughout the decisions this character is making. And this is a thing that happens in the book where every time some important detail like this comes up, it really gets explained in detail. And I do think that that's definitely one of Sterling's strengths. Like, he's very much like Neil Stephenson, where I just want to read the info dump. Like, um, I'm less interested in the character than I am in the info dump. And I would say with William Gibson, it's kind of the opposite, where the characters are not as textured, to me anyway. Like, they gain texture. I don't want to like sell Gibson short, or even Walter John Williams. Like, I don't want to sell his characters short, because they are both very much show don't tell writers. And I'll talk about Williams more because I love his work, and I feel like he doesn't get as much credit, which he absolutely should, in Cyberpunk. But Sterling will just go down this path on explaining something and an aspect of it, and you're just like, yeah, that could totally happen. um, so that all gets explained. She has to make this sort of decision that is a bit against her character, but, her boyfriend just died. She had to say no to the dog. Like, she let this girl come into her life. So obviously things are bubbling beneath the surface on Maya, and she goes through the procedure, and then she wakes up. She's 20 years old. They spend a lot of time talking about sort of the possibility of schizophrenia and identity shifting when a person wakes up and they're no longer in their body, the same body. Like, it is their body, but it's not the body that they're used to and that their mind is used to, and everything is going to change there. So, oh, you know what? I'm looking at the cover of Save the Cat, and it actually says, based on the books of Blake Snyder, in very small print. So maybe you should look up Save the Cat by Blake Snyder. That's a little sneaky. Well, there's a couple of them. There's also Jessica Brody. Maybe Blake Snyder has outsourced. It looks like that's what's happened. Blake Snyder has outsourced the idea of Save the Cat. So if you go to savethecat.com, you'll see all of this. So going back to Maya wakes up, and now Maya is no longer Maya. And I felt that part of the book was really effective. Like, the shifts in memory, the not knowing who she was, and then she has become, in her mind, Mia. And there was a lot of time put into, like one of the things that Sterling thinks will happen is that as people get in their 90s, they won't want to have sex anymore, which we've kind of seen that that's not the case. Not to dwell on that, not to be people in their 90s, but people in their 70s and on up. I only say this because it came up when I had to deal with memory care, and that's a thing that they talk about. Anyway, now we're dealing with Mia, and Mia, like, there are some agreements that Maya had to make to get the procedure. She had to tie up a lot of that real money that was mentioned into investments that will benefit the company for a period of time. And that was the payment that she made. Well, Mia doesn't care about any of that, and she runs away. And so at this point, I'm still intrigued by what's going to happen, but it sort of just becomes a follow the ingenue story. And I guess it's kind of an adventure story, but it just becomes kind of random. And I think that's where I was less engaged. Like, I'm still very engaged with the world, but Mia was not really doing things that endeared me to her. She ends up getting mixed up with some people that are in their 20s. They steal from a tourist, that Mia is talking to and kind of has a connection with. And then it turns out that the woman's purse was stolen. And so Mia's just making decisions that don't really make her a nice person. But that's all kind of a vehicle to describe this world of the polity, where you have people that have basically pulled the ladder up after them and created this supposedly safe world. But there's still all these people that are still young and being born. And that is one thing he doesn't touch on. So Maya has a child, and that's one of the things that gets touched on is her relationship with her daughter and how distant she feels from her daughter, because her daughter is basically another adult at this point, and they don't have a lot in common, Maya feels. And that's makes you sad for Maya. But it doesn't get it too much into why people have children or what like, is having a child just a completely selfish act in this world where people, like, there are more people. So if you're bringing more people, could potentially mean fewer jobs, or, the polity provides for everyone, but that is sort of suggested that's a relatively empty existence if you don't have a lot of resources, and not everybody has resources. So that was one piece of, like, okay, where are these younger people coming from? Like, people are still always going to have sex. I think that will happen, but I kind of wish that had been explained a little more, because there still are a lot of young people, and we live in a world now where, because resources are getting drawn up into older generations, and younger generations are having a harder time and working more, and everybody wonders, like, why aren't they having kids? Like, well, they don't have time and can't afford them, right? And they're tired. Well, that to me feels like a thing that will extend itself, and that's a pretty easy jump to make. Anyway, like, in this world, there are young people, and there is definitely a conflict between the older generation and the polity, and the younger generation, and them wanting to experience life. And there's this idea of being vivid, that older people are not vivid. They're kind of worn out, and the young people are the ones that are vivid. And this is pretty easy to, understand. But Maya, who's become Mia, and doesn't actually remember that she is Maya at this point. Like, there is a point where she has to remember who she is, but at this point, she's just kind of bouncing around. So, in a way, agency has been removed from the character. The character wants to go experience things, but doesn't really know what to do. And so they're just at the whims of other people that come into their life. So, this thief comes into her life. She sort of she does seize on the opportunity. He introduces her to some Roma in Europe, so you get a sense of people that are living outside the system, and that's cool. She does have the idea that in her mind that she wants to be in fashion, which is something that comes from Brit, the earlier girl. And so there's this sort of parallel that she's stealing Brit's life, which comes into play later on. But she basically gets a job as a model. That leads her to meeting some people who create mannequins. And there's a bunch of cool info dumps about, like, how the mannequins are created with, laser 3D printing. And then from there, she meets people in the fashion industry. And a lot of the information is portrayed through parties and conversations in bars and characters who just talk a lot. And there isn't, like, you don't realize that there's not a lot of straightforward action until an event towards the end of the book, which is action. It's violence. And so while the ideas are really interesting, and I'm going to be thinking about them for a long time, I'm just thinking about how the story was, how I would have chosen to tell this story. Like, if maybe more pressure could have been put on Maya from the company. Like, the idea of her just getting away from the company is a little easy. And then at that point, that is the hard thing for the character. And then after that, if the character is just floating around, there's, like, what is the character's motivation? So I think that's definitely something to think about. And then also the way the book was organized. So this is still a 350-page novel, but it only has 6 chapters, 4 of which are pretty long. Like, in the audiobook, they were 2 hours, 2.5 hours each. They are broken into sections. And I kind of think, like, this is something you see more in, I guess, older books. Like, newer books, I feel like people are very concerned about, like, don't stop the reader. Don't give the reader a reason to stop, right? And so the idea of, like, 4 huge chapters might actually turn off some readers. Whereas the way the book, like, those were sections, really, is what they were. And there were, like, actual interior chapters in each of those chapters, and each of those could have just been its own numbered chapter, or chapter break of some kind. But it made, even in looking at the audiobook, it was like, whoa, I got 2.5 hours in this chapter. Do I have time to, really get into this right now? Or I listened to it over a weekend, so I was doing stuff and I had time to really just listen to it while I was doing other things. But if I had been reading, maybe it would have been easier to put the book down, I guess, is something to think about. And especially if there's not, like, action driving it forward. Like, what's going to happen to this character? Is she going to survive? Is the medical company going to come get her? And, if this was more of a thriller, maybe there would have been some kind of, bounty hunter or something. That's maybe a little too simplistic. But it's mentioned at one point that, oh, the medical companies don't care because you have to come back to them, and they know that. Like, eventually you're going to want to extend your life again because now you're going to be addicted to this. So they don't need to chase you. And that probably is very much in line with the world building, but I think it saps some of the tension from the story and what's going to pull a reader through it. And so that's something to think about. I think if you're coming to this book, I would just recommend it so highly for its world building and having thought through every piece of what this world could be like. And then ultimately the philosophical question of, do people want to live this long? And what is identity when you live that long? Is Maya actually Mia? Did she become a whole new person when she was essentially, the ship of Theseus and recreated and then somehow imprinted, or her brain was, remade from the cellular level? Like, is she still the previous Maya? Now she's Mia. Maya comes back, but it's an integration of those two people. And just like any time a person goes through an event like that, just even in, our regular lifetimes, a lot of people say that you are no longer the same person. Integration is part of bringing trauma or change into your life, adjusting and living through that, and then becoming a new person. And adjustment disorder, which is a recognized disorder, is like the inability to integrate and adapt and move forward. And it's a real thing, and it's very hard. Um, so, so that was a piece of the book I wish it had explored. Well, it does explore it. I wish there was more of an external something pushing on Mia and then Maya throughout the story. And in the end, it ends on a really nice scene of, like, there's this concept of the title Holy Fire, which is basically the memory palace is very much like, people want the memory palace. It seems to represent some technological, like, safe room where a newer generation of people that she gets involved with, who are like artists and anarchists and whatever, and sort of bohemians, the trope of that. And they want to basically develop what is going to be the next phase of immortals in this future. And there's a really interesting passage where, basically talking about like the X and Y curve of life extension and how long you need to live before you will basically be immortal. And when the singularity comes, and in this future, like 2070, like the singularity has still not arrived. Like, we're still not immortal, but when the time does come, when that generation will be immortal, they're no longer human. And there is a lot of discussion of post-human, human aspects of the dog that's in the story. There are other animal characters. What is human? What is not human? What does it mean to be immortal? And then obviously, if some people are immortal, at that point, either the older people, like, cultural power shifts and the people that aren't going to live forever, but they've got all the capital, right? So what's going to happen there? And there's some suggestion that the polity is not as in control as they say they are. Like, there's another discussion with a detective at the end, which, kind of breaks us out of all of the discussions with the bohemians that we've been having about these sort of high level thoughts and ideas about, life and living forever. And then it comes back down to earth with a detective who is like, you don't realize how close we are to chaos all the time. And I sort of wish that had been like more throughout the book. So while it's cyberpunk, it's a really interesting, it's sort of this utopian, or I don't even want to call it utopian, because the shell around it, the government, could easily be called dystopian. But it's about a group of people that are trying to sort of create that artistic utopia within it, right? And that's still interesting to read about. And there's just a lot of, every time you come up to some new nugget of information about this world, it is explored so thoroughly. It's just often given in like info dumps or characters who are kind of pontificating, or there are some characters that are there and they're interesting, but like, what do they really do? Except talk to the main character. And so that's sort of why they exist. And that's okay. That's fine. Maybe I was keyed for more of a thriller type cyberpunk. Like, when I think of cyberpunk, I'm thinking of something probably with more action, more tension throughout it. And this book was like I said, like follow like it's an adventure story. We don't know what's going to happen to the main character as they sort of bounce around this world. And they're still a relatively interesting character, but they also do some things that I'm just like, I don't know why you're upset here exactly. So the book ends, like, I jumped ahead a little bit. The dog that she refuses is kind of Chekhov's gun throughout the whole story. And then, of course, the dog comes back, and the dog acts out violently and kills two cats. So I guess the dog is kind of reverting to its earlier nature, although I also don't like that because I don't think all dogs are cat killers. And I like cats. So the main character is really upset by this. She goes and finds the person that the cats belong to and apologizes. But throughout, while the dog is acting out like this, like, it turns out that his mind was tied to the memory palace. And when this art group is in there trying to do things to the memory palace to make it what they want, they're actually damaging his mind. And so throughout this interaction, while he's like attacking her and the cats, he keeps saying, "You hurt me." And the whole time I'm thinking, like, I feel terrible for the dog. I want her to try and help the dog, you know? And the dog bites her. And I'm like, yeah, you deserve to have gotten bit. And so I just am not having a lot of sympathy for this character. And I want the dog to be like, just want someone to take care of the dog. And so that's like the ending, like emotional takeaway for me with the book. So yeah, that was a violent scene. It upset me in that I don't like to see animals like uselessly hurt. I've gotten to the point where I don't like to see anyone needlessly hurt. Like, I feel like the girlfriend that gets killed, or the mother that dies, or the wife that dies for the character, or in some cases the husband or the child. Like, I don't like that trope. I don't like a character that's made specifically to be hurt to create some sort of, you know, movement in the character or some sort of motivation in the character. I want the character to make decisions based on their strengths and qualities and what makes them either a good or a bad person. I don't necessarily like people acting like, obviously people act out of trauma and bad things happen, but maybe I'm just at a point in my life where that feels kind of cheap to me, and I don't like it. So that's my opinion. Um, I also always find myself thinking about the person that died, and like, they had an interior life and they had things they wanted to do. And um, there was just what was the Darren Aronofsky movie about the 90s that just came out that basically, oh shoot, of course it's not going to give me like all of the movies. It's the most recent one and I just saw it. And Caught Stealing. There's a character in that movie that is very prominent, and then they're killed. And I was just like, I like that character. Like, why couldn't the writer figure out how to keep them alive or make them part of the story so they could continue being cool? Yeah. Anyway, so I still highly recommend Holy Fire. I think from a world building perspective and thinking about how Sterling conceived this story, and also sort of, I'm appreciating more and more reading science fiction, you know, from periods in time, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, even the 2000s, that we're imagining the internet, we're imagining, you know, the world we have today and what that world looks like. Sterling is often referring to the net. He was one of the first people that really was conceiving of the net and how that might affect us. And in a way, he's got a very sort of utopian idea of what that could mean. And the net in this world is not like the net of social media that we have today. So that's also an interesting sort of time capsule to read about. So Holy Fire by Bruce Sterling. From an author's perspective, I absolutely recommend it as a great example of world building. And I guess as you're reading this, just think about different things you might do with the characters, or how satisfying the characters, the plot was in this book. But I'm so glad that I read it and I recommend it. All right. Well, hey, thank you for hanging out with me, and I will see you next time. Later.